Mist clung to the river like a second skin, and the light that managed to seep through it fell wan and colorless upon the dead. Flags tangled with reeds. Splintered lances jabbed up from the shallows like the gray ribs of some drowned behemoth. A plate gauntlet, hand still inside it, had settled among the stones with its palm upturned, offering nothing, asking for nothing. Men had labored half the night to clear the ford, dragging bodies to the banks where they could be counted, named if they were lucky, burned if anyone had strength left to stack the pyres. The Trident carried away what the living could not lift. Prince Rhaegar stood where the water ran deepest and swiftest, the churned ford stretching behind him like a wound. He had left his helm upon a rock, and his hair was damp with mist. The pale silver darkened to pewter in the weak dawn. His armor sat upon him as if it belonged to some other man, a device of steel and leather that had been strapped around an instrument rather than a body. When he lifted his hand, the rings creaked, and he had the sudden, absurd memory of plucking the harp at Summerhall as a child, his fingers black with ash from the half-collapsed chimneys, his mother's thin voice warning him away from cracked stones. He bent and took something from the water. A ruby. It lay in his palm like a drop of clotted blood, cold enough to hurt his skin. The current had scoured it smooth and robbed it of fire. Yet when he turned it, there was that old, terrible flash, red gone brighter than the sun for the blink of an eye. Rubies had leapt from his breast when Robert's warhammer found him, bursts of light that had set men cheering who could not even see him properly for the press and spray and the rage of iron on iron. Some had tried to name the moment later: glory, judgment, doom. But Rhaegar remembered only surprise, not at the blow, at the sound. The warhammer had not rung upon his armor. It had opened it, and the sound had been soft, like the tearing of cloth. And then he had caught the warhammer's shaft and forced it aside, stepped in under the swing, and found Robert's jaw with the pommel of his sword. He could still feel that strike along the bone of his forearm. Pain remembered, not pain felt. The man had gone down on one knee and sought to rise at once and failed. Rhaegar's sword, that bright and courtly thing whose voice he knew better than his own, had come to rest at the hollow of the Baratheon's throat. Yield, he had said, and the word had tasted of iron. The river made free with them both, sucking at boots and greaves, sleeking hair to faces so they looked like boys. Robert's eyes were blue and full of a child's fury. Finish, the rebel had said. The blood on his teeth matched Rhaegar's rubies. Do it. I will not have your death as a banner, Rhaegar had said, though he had thought of the memories that would be born of it, the songs that would do half his work for him. Yield, Robert. Robert had spat pink water and struck at Rhaegar's sword with the back of his hand. Like a drunk cuffing a hound from under a table. I yield as a stag yields to winter, he muttered. It takes him all the same. He'd laughed then, a hoarse, frightening sound, joyless as a raven, and his head had tipped backward. The river bore him against Rhaegar's legs for a breath, and Rhaegar took a knee so that the Baratheon's shoulders rested upon his thigh. He had felt the heat of the man through armor, and the trembling that was not fear. And some small rational part of him had thought, he is badly hurt. He will die if I am not swift. Now the morning after, or the morning after that, the days were cooling into one another already. He closed his hand around the dull ruby and left it there. The gem bit into the soft under the knuckle. He needed the bite. All night he had ordered and signed and spoken so softly, men had leaned close to hear him, and now there was nothing to speak at for a little while. The mist licked the gaps in his armor, drew chill into him until he shivered. "Your Grace," came a voice behind him. He straightened. It was not the manner of the White Bull to say the thing he had just said, not to him. Gerald Hightower had never called him that, not once in all the years he had ridden at his shoulder. The title fell heavy in the mist. Rhaegar turned. The White Bull sat his horse 2 paces from the edge of the water, helm under one arm. His hair had gone more silver than white, but his face was unlined for his age, an old man's patience laid across a young man's bones. He had not slept, or slept on his horse, and yet his gaze was steady. Barristan Selmy, sword arm splinted, sat quiet beside him with reins in his teeth, and a roll of parchment between his knees. There were others behind them, Jonathan Derry with blood dried into his beard, the remnants of the personal guard, and beyond them, some of the petty lords and captains who had followed banners because they were too proud to follow a man. "Prince," Gerald said then, unmaking the misstep, and Rhaegar found that he could breathe again. "The scouts confirm Lord Mooton has driven stragglers from the eastern bank. They say also that Lord Connington's column is 2 days behind us, and there are Blackwood men taking oaths at Seaguard. Lord Tully has withdrawn to River Run. It may be that he will bargain. Mender Runnan? He will mourn," Rhaegar said. "We will give him time for that. The dead deserve it of us." He looked at Barristan. "How fares Lord Robert?" The splinted man swallowed. "He woke once, my prince," he said around the leather of the reins. "He asked if he were dead and then bid me leave him to it. The maesters say his ribs are broken. There is a bruise behind his ear that makes them grim. If he lives through today, they will be less grim." "Send to them for their lists," Rhaegar said. "I would hear what herbs they lack and what instruments, and where we may find them between here and King's Landing. If they ask for the moon, promise it them. If they ask for a poultice of cow dung, give them that too. He is not to die for lack of what we can give. If he dies, it will be because the gods desire it." "Yes," Barristan said. And then, as if confessing, "He is very strong." "So am I," Rhaegar said. And the three of them let the lie go past them like a leaf in the current. Later, when the mists had thinned, and the air had the clear, hard taste of a winter morning in it, though winter was not yet here, he walked among the wounded. He learned names and the shape of their pain. A languid, tidy litany he spoke with parted lips. He sent men to dig shallow graves where wood was scarce for burning, and he knelt with a weeping boy whose brother had been carried downstream and would have no grave at all. He sent for bread and salt and wine and had women who had followed the train to cook coarse stews from whatever they could take from abandoned packs and farmers' stockpiles. He spoke to a horn-footed old woman who had found the rubies churned to the river's lip and filled her apron with them. He bought them with coins so that they might buy her grandchildren meat later. And she bowed with such careful pride he could not bear to meet her gaze. The stories would find their own current. Let them say he took his rubies back at fair price. Let them say he bought the river itself if they wished. He would not salt the tale with blood. When at last he allowed himself to sit, it was with the white bull in a stretch of clear grass above the bank. The sun, such as it was, came warm on his damp hair and made him sleepy. He could have closed his eyes and woken a day from now with hunger gnawing and the world altered around him. Gerald Hightower sat with the patience of a weathered stone and watched the river move. Rhaegar thought of the Tower of Joy and how the wind sang there, as if each stone had a throat. He did not look at Gerald when he said, "You sent to Arthur." "I sent," the White Bull said. He did not say "I sent" without permission. He did not need to. "He will not ride." "He will ride when I call him," Rhaegar said automatically. The words were an old cloak. They fell the same way every time he wore them. "I told him to hold what he holds until I called him. That was the promise I made." Gerald's profile did not alter, but there was a stiffness in the line of the jaw that told Rhaegar he had pushed too closely to the bone. "He will not ride," the White Bull repeated, and this time there was a weight to it. "You know why?" Rhaegar knew why. He could conjure the chamber as if it were laid beneath his eyes, its high windows opening upon the blue air of the Dornish sky, the late summer heat lying like a silver coin on the sill, the bed with its curtains that lifted of their own accord whenever the breeze found them, the little bowl of water on the table for roses, and how she had dipped her fingers and touched them to her throat to cool herself. He could see the shadows that had pooled at her collarbones, and the pulse that labored there as she tried to feign a calm she did not possess. He could be anywhere in the world, and that chamber would rise to him entire the moment he reached a hand for it. The day he had gone away from it, he had loved no less. He had loved more. It made a cruelty of his leaving, and a necessity of his return. He had said "I must," and when she had asked, when he had said "when I can," she had laughed, almost. She had put that cool hand to his cheek and said that "when" was a word made of smoke. "He will hold," Rhaegar said. The words tasted like ash now. That is what must be. Gerald looked at him. You must not lie to yourself, my prince. Rhaegar closed his eyes because for a heartbeat it was too much to keep them open. From under the lids exploded a constellation of colors and patterns. He had tried to map once as a boy with a charcoal stub. The marks afterward like tiny burnt hands on the wall. He thought then of Elia. The thought had the shape of a cup, lifted with both hands, because the vessel was too precious to trust to one. He had been gone from her too long. He had asked too much and told too little. The city coiled around her like a serpent around an egg. He had left her and the children within those scales, and then he had walked away. I will go to the city, he said. And the weight of the choice settled upon him like a mantle. I will put an end to the burning. Gerald's breath was not quite a sigh, not quite a draw of wind that presaged a storm. If you can, he said, but there was no hint of mockery in it, only fatigue. I can, Rhaegar said. I must. That evening he went to the tent where Robert lay. The canvas had warmed all day and kept the heat, but someone had slit the sides to let wind through so that it breathed like a lung. The Baratheon lay on his left side with his face turned slightly away and his arm strapped against his ribs. One of the camp's girls had washed him. His hair looked darker because it was clean. His mouth was swollen in a way that would make speech slur when he woke. Rhaegar sat on a stool that creaked like a mast. He said nothing. After a while Robert's lashes fluttered, and he fixed on Rhaegar as if seeing a stranger. He swallowed and coughed and winced at his own cough. Your men are afraid I will die in my sleep, he said. It came fogged and thick. Are you so eager to die? Rhaegar asked. Robert let out the hint of a laugh. I am eager to drink, he said. I am eager to break things with my hands. I am not eager to lie still. He turned his face very slightly. And what are you eager for, Prince? Have you the thing you wanted? Rhaegar could not say yes. He would not say no. He made of his silence something like a veil. After a time he said, When you are well enough to travel, I will take you to King's Landing under guard. You will stand trial for rebellion. I will not allow my father to roast you in his throne room. This I swear to you. Will you sit in his lap and hold his hands from the torches? The lilt came easier. The swelling had not stolen Robert's cruelty. Will you sing your pretty songs to him until he goes to sleep? And then you can put out all the fires you did not stop before they started? He will burn me because he likes to burn, dragon. He will burn you because he is afraid of you. He will burn anything because he is cold, and the cold is in his head. Nines. Rhaegar thought of a boy with a harp, and a mother thin as paper, saying, Do not go near those stones, Rhaegar. Do not, you must not. He remembered the itch under his skin that had been stronger than obedience. He will not burn you, he repeated, and this time Robert turned his face enough for Rhaegar to see the weary interest in his eyes. This close, he was still a young man. The beard he had grown so hastily had left bare, soft patches along his throat. Then kill him, Robert said. He did not whisper. His voice was a struck bell under its injuries, resonant for all that it could not sing. Kill your father. Do it now, before he burns the city and your wife and your children and mine. Send some knife to him with soft shoes and a steady hand, and after, call it justice. I will not be a kinslayer, Rhaegar said. No, Robert said. You will be a fool then. I tried to kill you, and I failed. I yield. He closed his eyes. I yield to winter. Rhaegar did not want to confess anything to this man, but from him the truth rose like something that had been waiting underwater and had found the current at last. If I pull him down, he said, if I lay him aside in some soft chamber where he can do no harm, then what am I? A usurper in all but name. The High Septon will cloak it as best he can, but the stain will run through the cloth. Robert opened one eye. You are your father's heir, he said, and for a moment there was almost kindness in it. You are the heir to his madness too, if you will not do what must be done to stop it. He made a noise in his throat like a laugh. What does it matter to me? I am going to die. All your maester's herbs be damned. Say you will not let him burn me. I will believe you because I want to. But he will burn other men. He will burn women too. He will burn the city because he has found that a city burns brighter than a man. His eye closed again. "I wish you had killed me." "Sleep," Rhaegar said, because the alternative was to take the man by the shoulders and shake him, which would accomplish nothing and do harm. "Sleep, Robert." He sat until he had, and then sat longer, because the silence in the tent gave him the illusion that he could keep the world from moving simply by not moving himself. Word went out, as word will. The ravens took wing from Ashford in King's Landing and River Run. They flared along the coasts and slanted up the mountains, their shadows breaking briefly upon country roads, where old men were bent like question marks over their hoe handles. The words that rode beneath their wings were not all the same words. Each letter was the same letter, but every man who read it lifted different breath out of it. Princess Elia sat and held hers until the room swayed and her maid touched her wrist and said, "My lady," in a voice that undid her. In the great seep tea, the high septon knelt longer than was necessary before the stranger, who does not answer even when he answers. In the red keep, Varys unfolded a parchment with the same delicate care he would have shown to a spider's web in a difficult corner, and his eyes flicked left and right as if there might be a different message concealed within the first, if he only stared in a new direction. In the yard beneath the Tower of the Hand, Jaime Lannister looked up and saw the raven go. His armor had been polished that morning by a boy with a hirelip who had not spoken but had hummed to himself like a kettle on a low fire. Jaime lifted his hand without thinking, and the raven's shadow went across his palm like a stain. He was 19 and had never been less sure of himself in his life. He had not been knighted for his certainty. He had been knighted because men had said, "That one leaps." He had leapt, and here he was, the guardsman's gossip in his ears like gnats, the king's breath often too close to his face. The king smelled of crushed plants and old smoke, and too often, of fear. He knew the city's new rumor before it finished forming words. "The prince has won at the Trident. The prince comes home." Jaime tasted a coppery joy. It alarmed him. He had not known he needed the man so badly. He should have known. In the prince's presence the king shrank, not out of fear of his son, but because there was less of him altogether when they stood together. It was a trick of proximity, the way a candle seems small in the sun. "Sir Jaime," said Pycelle in the spelled-out manner of men who think they need not be in a hurry because they have always had time enough. "His Grace desires to see you." "Desires," Jaime said. He liked the word. There was nothing of desire in Aerys that Jaime could recognize when it came to people. Desire, yes, when he stood on his own balcony and looked over his city as if it had been fashioned by his hands. He desired fire too, as men desired a roast when they had been too long without meat. But when he touched a servant's face, it was the touch of a man gauging a horse's soundness after a race. He desired to know that a thing would not break before he had finished making use of it. When Jaime went into the king's presence, he had to wait for his eyes to make sense of the scene. Aerys had drawn every curtain halfway, so the chamber lay in perpetual twilight. He liked that now. The not quite dark. It made him feel safe, he said. And he had repeated that so often Jaime now heard it when he was alone in the privy. The king's pyromancer was there, his long fingers dark with grease to the nail beds, and beside him stood a young man with the unslept, fervent look of an acolyte who has not yet learned how to be bored. They smelled of lamp oil and the green, sweet note of pine that clung to men who had spent the morning moving trestles, laden with urns. "Sir Jaime," Aerys said, and the sound was a pleasant one if a man pretended it emerged from a different mouth. The king's hair, that fine white cloud, floated about his shoulders. He had bound it with a silk ribbon the color of old bruises. "Come close." Jaime went to one knee and kissed the ring. He had long ago learned the trick of not breathing when he did it. His father's advice had been precise. "Count 5 and let your mouth barely touch." "Your Grace, do you know what the city is?" Aerys asked him suddenly. The king tapped his fingers against the arms of the chair. He tapped them fast as if he were drumming in a contest, and the man across from him had already outpaced him by 20 strokes. City," Jaime said. "Is people." "People," Aerys repeated, and he smiled with all his teeth. "No, boy. You are a boy. Your daddy made a boy out of hard metal and sent him to me. And here you kneel and think that a city is people." He flicked his fingers at the king's pyromancer, who stepped forward with an obsequious twist at the waist. "Rossart knows what a city is. Tell him, Rossart." "A city is a kiln, your grace," Rossart said. His eyes had gone unfocused. "It bakes things. Clay, oats, men." "Men," Eris agreed, and his fingers had stopped tapping. "Bread, too." His voice lowered. "The prince comes." Jaime found that his mouth had dried, and he could not form the words he had intended. He had meant to say, "Your grace, the prince brings you victory," or "Your grace, the prince will relieve you." The king reached out and took Jaime's hair in his hand. A careless fistful at the back of the head, like a father catching a child to steady him. Jaime did not pull away. "When the prince comes," Eris said, "we will have a feast." "Yes," Jaime said, and he could hear the other word leaning against that one, like a shadow. Almost the same shape. "When the prince comes, we will have a fire." In the Vale, the Eyrie stood like a story told too many times, all polish upon its stones, but the edges blunted. Lord John Arryn walked slow within its airy halls, with a cane he did not need yet, because a man who had lived as long as he had gains a taste for devices that promise steadiness. When the raven came, he stood very still and read again. The candle blew in the draught and wax shuddered. He closed his eyes and saw Robert running at the ford, the way he ran when there was no chance at all, which was when he ran best. John had watched a boy become a man too quickly and contrived to be glad both times. He knew the way boys become men better than he knew any other thing in this world, and he knew that the making was as likely to tear them as to temper them. He sent for Maester Coleman, and for the men who would carry messages, and for Lady Lysa too, because she would hear in the corridors anyway, and her hearing it from a servant would fold badly into her heart, and he could not do that to her today. He sat with her and took her hand, which cooled in his grasp like water. She cried as she used to cry, with a little girl misery that made him want to pick her up and put her somewhere safe in his belly, where she would never again be touched by the fingers of hard news. He knew the thing she would say before she said it. "If Robert is dead," she began, and then broke off, because it had not been said. If he dies," John said, "we will remember him. And if he lives, we will remember him. The remembering is all we control." She looked at his face as if searching for something there that would hurt her anew. He had seen that look before. "And Eddard," she said quickly, in the way of a girl who steers herself away from one ledge by walking toward another. "What of Eddard?" "What of him?" John said. He could not add, "He will go where his sister is." He did not know if it was true, but he suspected it. Eddard Stark had that stark stillness in him that fools took for emotionlessness. John had seen the look in the boy's eyes the day they had spoken of Lyanna. It had reminded him of winter. Not the pretty winter lay over the mountains, but the one down in the mines that set wood to thinking like stone. Eddard Stark was at that moment riding toward the Riverlands, under a sky that had decided not to spend its rain yet. He had grown thin in the war. He had always been narrow, as the sons of the North often are. But now his face had hollowed, and the hollows were lined as if a more careful hand had cut him out of the air. Howland Reed rode at his shoulder, the Crannogman light in the saddle, his reed spear fastened behind him, so that it jutted into the day like a question. Their company was not large. Eddard did not collect men as Robert had, by the heft of his laugh, and the promise of a strong back at a feast. He gathered men who wished to be gathered, and did not notice that they had come to him until he turned and saw them, and then he was embarrassed. The raven had come to them on a gray morning. Eddard had read and looked to Howland without speaking. It had been Howland who said, "The Trident is a long river." Eddard had had to sit. He had thought, "If Robert is dead, he will want me to be angry." He could do fury. It was there in him when he needed it. He had opened that door enough times now to know the weight of it in his hand. What he had not expected was the grief. It came not hot, but cold, and set upon his shoulders without consent or comfort. And when his men looked to him, they saw it, and mistook it for ice. He said to Howland, "I will go on." And Howland had nodded as if it were a thing a man might decide, the way he decides whether to sleep under a tree or under a cart when it rains. "Go where?" one of the men had asked. "A riverman boy with hair too blonde for this part of the world." "You've heard it. The prince took him. He'll be taken to the city. The war is done." "The war is not done," Eddard said, more sharply than he intended. He found that the word war tasted like a coin in his mouth. "Where then?" Howland asked when the boy had drifted back to his place, abashed and muttering. Eddard had looked at the road and beyond it to the brown fields. "To my sister," he said. He had never been to Dorne. He had never wanted to go. He preferred places that held themselves low to the ground, places with thickness to them, where a man could put his back to a tree and feel that it would not go soft underneath him. Dorne was a country of knives laid out to shine. Howland had a friend among the Greenblood who had taught him some of the river's tongues, and had laughed to say that in Dorne, even the wind had a knife in it. Eddard thought of Lyanna in that land, and felt a confusing mix of relief and alarm. She would have liked the wind's knife. She would have stood and let it cut her, and admired how sharp it was. He had seen her do exactly that once in Winterfell when the first frost had come, and the stable boy's bucket had cracked in his hands. She had run her finger along the rim until a bead of blood smiled at her under the thumbnail, and then she had sucked it and said, "It has a taste to it." He rode in silence for a while, and Howland let him. Howland did not waste words on days when words were useless. When he finally spoke, it was to say, "You will not go alone." "I can go with as many men as we have," Eddard said, "and I will still be alone when I look upon her face." Howland did not argue with that. "We will go by ways that have no names," he said. And if that was a kindness, Eddard took it as one. At Storm's End, the world had been pared down to bread and salt and water. They had little enough of any of those. Stannis Baratheon stood upon the ramparts and looked not at the sea, which mocked him with its fullness, but at the long swaths of Tyrell tents that gleamed like a garden below him. He had learned the shapes of their coats. He knew the exact number of white plumes Lord Paxter's men wore when they marched to the kitchens. He knew that if he saw more men than that, they had brought fish from the fleet. He knew the shape of the onion boats that came at night, and the way their lanterns played along the undercurve of the waves. He did not know the name of the smuggler who risked his neck to bring them, but he would learn it. He would learn it, and it would not go unremarked. The raven came, and he read, and his face betrayed nothing. His brother might die. His brother might live. The siege might lift. The siege might not. He thought of the council at King's Landing and of the narrow-eyed men who spoke of honor while they counted coin in their heads. He thought of his brother saying, "I will be king," and us laughing together, because they had been boys and the world had been a beach with a fire on it, and a girl who smiled. He did not look to the sea, but Davos Seaworth had his eyes there, and Davos saw the way the light changed upon it in the late afternoon. And he thought of his boys at home, and he thought too of a time when he had been a different man, and had not yet decided not to be a coward. In Casterly Rock, where the corridors took sound and multiplied it between stone walls like cats making kittens, Lord Tywin Lannister stood before an open coffer. Gold has a smell if men claim otherwise. Clean gold smells of nothing, old gold of hands. This was old gold. He looked into it and saw not coin to be spent, but promises. When the raven came, he did not smile. Hope made men foolish. He folded the parchment once, and then again. Precise. And put it away. He had always wished to be precise. He did not ask for a horse. He sent a man quietly to King's Landing with a letter that contained no warmth at all, and no ornament, and one true sentence. At King's Landing, Princess Elia sat like a woman who had learned how to be still, so that her bones did not betray her. Her maid brought figs that tasted of the alleyways, because they had been bought at a price that was not fair. Elia ate anyway. Her children were well. That was a sentence that had to be repeated to be true. Rhaenys was nearly old enough to be friends with the girls of men who wished to be loved by the crown. She was also young enough to forget their names. Aegon had begun to pull himself along the tiles with his arms, and the sound of it in the mornings had become a comfort to Elia. It meant there was something in the world that desired motion as much as breath. She read the letter twice. She put it under her pillow for an hour like a woman who believes a thing can be warmed to fit the shape of a heart. When she took it out again, she sat a long time with it in her lap and did not realize she was tracing the words with a motion like prayer. She went to the nursery and sat with the children's nurse and let the woman tell her an old story. She pretended that she did not know it was an old story. Afterward, she stood at the window and looked toward the street of sisters. She could not see the sept, but she could smell the sweet oil that some baker used 2 buildings over. And it made her think of Dorne for no good reason at all, and she put her hand against the pane and left there the mark of her palm. Rhaegar reached the city with his guard and his prisoners on the 4th day. The Trident had receded into something like a dream. The city smelled as it always smelled, of bodies, of dampness, of cinnamon, if you were lucky, of shit whether you were lucky or not. People lined the streets and stared. They had stared before when he passed, and they would stare again, but this gaze had an edge on it, and he saw how it cut. It was not the cutting that hurt him. It was the shape of the blade. Fear for some, hatred for others, hunger as constant as the stones for the rest. He rode steadily and kept his mouth from thinning. He made himself look. And if a woman lifted a child for him to see, he lifted his hand and acknowledged her. And for that instant, they both pretended there was nothing else required of them. He went first to the Red Keep and then to the throne room. The doors opened upon the smell of heat. Torches had been lit where torches were not needed. The greenish smoke of the stockpiled oils clung to the rafters. The king sat upon the iron throne with his fingers splayed upon its arms like a man grateful for something solid that would not slide away. The sight of him had for a long time been a complicated thing in Rhaegar's chest. A child's love bent into a man's loyalty, bent into a man's fear, bent into a prince's duty. Today, it did not bend. It lay flat as a blade. "Father," he said. Aerys smiled and showed his teeth. "Son." There was a murmur, the long cough of the court deciding to remember its etiquette. They went to their knees like wheat in a wind. Rhaegar stood a moment longer than he should have. A heartbeat, 2, and then he too knelt. It was not for Aerys. It was for the realm that had taught him to bend and had given him language for bending. When he rose again, he saw that Varys' eyes were on him with the careful, untouched sorrow that men wear like fine cloaks on cold days. Pycelle blinked and blinked again, and his beard trembled like moss in a current. Jaime Lannister stood to the right of the throne and watched Rhaegar as if he held something that ached in his shoulder. "I have come with victory," Rhaegar said. His voice did not tremble. "Robert Baratheon lies under guard. The Northmen have scattered. The River Lords bend their heads. The Reach keeps its gardens for you. Only Storm's End holds, and it holds hungry." Aerys leaned forward until the shards of metal caught at his robe. This was the thing that always undid Rhaegar a little. The certainty with which the throne lit upon the king like a thing that had chosen him. "Victory," the king said. He smelled of lamp oil and a faint sweetness that made Rhaegar think of the Sept sacristy when the windows had been shut too long. "Victory. At the ford that will bear your name." He cocked his head then. "A little, like a bird listening for worms. They say the river kept your rubies, my son." Rhaegar lifted his hand, and because the gods are cruel, he still had the ruby in his palm. He opened his fingers, and the stone looked dark as dried blood. "It has a good hold," he said. "I will not begrudge it." "And what will you begrudge?" Aerys asked, and his smile had grown wider. "You will not begrudge me this." He flicked his fingers, and Rossard stepped into the light, as if conjured. "We will have a feast." Rhaegar saw then the way the light gathered in the corners of the room. It was not candlelight. The air itself seemed to have taken on a thickness. He had passed men in the corridors whose hands had been greasy, and whose eyes had not been right. He had thought of kitchens. He thought now of tunnels. He saw the way Varys's mouth tightened before it softened again into concern. He looked up at the throne and saw that Jaime Lannister's breathing had changed. A fraction. He knew that a breath can be a paragraph if a man listens to it long enough. "We will have a feast," he said, and his voice was soft. He turned so that the room could see him. He spoke to the court and to the listening stones. "We will have a feast when I have gone among the city's wells and seen that they are unpoisoned. We will have a feast when I have walked the granaries and seen that the grain is intact. We will have a feast when I have sent men to every watchpost to take note of what sits beneath it and why. And when those men have come back with paper stained with lamp smoke and their own sweat and told me that they understand the city as a well-built ship is understood by the shipwright who has counted every nail. And then, Father, if there is not enough food, we will take my plate and yours and melt them down so that we may buy it. Then? Someone laughed then, which was either brave or idiotic, and the sound died at once as if strangled by the room. Eris did not move. He seemed not to breathe. The Red Keep goes quiet so completely sometimes that a man hears his own body as if it belonged to someone else. The movement of his eyes under the lids like the ticking of some tiny internal clock. At last the king said, "You will be my good son. I will be the realm's," Rhaegar said. And the words were too large for the space behind his teeth. He let them fall, and the room took them, and did whatever rooms do with such things. Stared and remembered, and forgot. He found Elia in the nursery later, as he had promised himself 1,000 times in the months before. She rose when he came, and her mouth trembled, and then became very still. They did not embrace at once. He went to the cradle and put his hand flat on the linen near Aegon's belly. He did not touch the boy. He could not yet. He had often imagined this moment, and in every imagining he had knelt and wept. In the truth of it, he stood and was careful. Rhaenys came and took his thumb as if it were some well-known game the two of them played in which she trapped his hand, and he acted astonished. She had grown inches, and he had missed them. This was a cruelty he had made, and it was a precise cruelty, the worst kind. It could not be undone by breadth of good intention. It could only be met by small days properly lived thereafter. When he turned to Elia, he knelt to her because he had not knelt to his father. He took her hands and put his forehead to them. He spoke not at all. The silence between them filled and then overflowed, and afterward, there was a quiet that felt new enough to be a gift. At last, Elia said in that dry, beautiful voice of hers, "Your hair is damp." "The river," he said. "The river," she repeated, and he wondered if she remembered Summerhall as he did, how the lake had reflected the ruined towers, how the lily pads had been fat as small plates. "Forgive me," he started, and she raised one hand and set it upon his hair and pressed very gently. "Later," she said. "Forgive me later. For now, hold your daughter because she asks it of you." He did. Rhaenys climbed and clung and told him an alarming story about a cat made of smoke that lived in the kitchens and came out when the cooks were very angry. Elia sat with Aegon and watched them, and the peace that came then was a fragile, exact thing. He held it like a bird. That night, he sent for Gerald Hightower and Barristan Selmy and Jonathor Derry and a handful of men whose loyalty was cut into them rather than painted on. He sent for Varys and for Pycelle because he must. He did not send for Rossart. The White Bull stood with his hands on the back of a chair and listened to Rhaegar's plan without taking his gaze off the far wall. Barristan's splinted arm lay against his side like a sentence he had accepted. When Rhaegar spoke the word Great Council, Pycelle puffed like a fish pulled too quickly from a deep net, and Varys' head tilted like a bird's. Rhaegar said he would ask of the High Septon the convening of the great lords in King's Landing to discuss the governance of the realm, until Aerys' health had improved and until such time as... He did not finish that sentence. He did not say the word regent, nor the word remove. He said safety, and he said the realm, and he said duty. He said, "We will put away the wildfire from the city's bones," and Barristan Selmy closed his eyes and seemed to say a word with his eyelids. "And if his grace says no," Jonathor Derry asked, not unkindly. "I will ask again," Rhaegar said. "And if he still says no, I will ask the lords what they will bear. If they will not bear me, that will be plain." "And if he burns you first," Gerald Hightower said. Rhaegar looked at him. "Then you will have your answer about what we must bear." After, alone, he took out a piece of parchment and wrote to Arthur Dane. He did not know whether the letter would find him. Sometimes the wind ate such words and left nothing. He wrote with the care of a scribe copying scripture. He did not write of love or of prophecies whose shapes had changed when he put names to them. He wrote only, "Hold. Then, I will come." And then, because he could not help himself, even though he had told himself there would be no more indulgence in this letter, he wrote her name. He did not write Lyanna. He wrote the name by which he had said he would call her if the child came before winter. He sealed the letter and sat looking at it until the candle went guttering into the shape of a bird whose wings were melting. He slept in the chair and woke with a knife in his neck, ready to fall. It was only the thread of light along the curtains. When he opened them, the city lay below him in a light that made even its broken places look deliberate. On the second day, he went among the wells. He went with men who carried scales and leathers and hammers. He lifted the lids and smelled the water and watched the men measure it. He went to the granaries and made a count of bags, so tedious men began to think he was a fool, which suited him. He had the fires banked in the hall, and the draught opened in the kitchens, and the urns taken from places where they did not belong. He spoke to the alchemists and to the men who worked in the bellies of the city, the ones who knew how to unstop smells and where the rats went when the rains came. He lost hours there and did not regret it. He learned a city's courage. It is always the smallest courage. Men who carry, women who wait without keening until keening becomes useful. He returned to the Red Keep in the thin end of afternoon and found that the king had summoned him to a council. When he went, he wore no armor. It was a decision he had made in the morning and clung to stubbornly as the day grew uglier. The room had been scraped clean of courtiers and filled with chairs that looked as if they had been acquired in a hurry. Eris sat with Rossart at his side and the other pyromancers near him like shadows. Varys stood farther off than was his habit. Pycelle had found a chair very like his chair at home and sat in it with a grim comfort that made Rhaegar wish him better of it. The White Bull stood to Rhaegar's left, Barristan to his right, Jonathan just behind. "We will burn the traitor," Eris said without preamble. "We will burn him in the square, so that his fat will go into the stones and make them shine. It will be justice, and it will be lovely." Rhaegar pictured the man in the tent saying, "I wish you had killed me," and had to set his hand upon the table to keep it from curling. "No," he said. Eris leaned back. He smiled. He did not speak. He simply waited. "No," Rhaegar said again. And beyond the king's shoulder he saw Jaime Lannister's hand twitch against the scabbard. A motion so small it could have been fancy. Rhaegar said, "We will give Lord Robert to the Black Cells and let him heal. When the council sits, we will put him before them and call his liege lords to answer for him, as the law says. If they say we must take his head, we will take his head. If they say we must send him to the wall, we will send him to the wall. If they say we must bend the law, we will argue with them until they are bored and agree to the law precisely to avoid our voices." "Bend a wall." The king laughed. It was a cracked thing, dry as stones. "I will burn him," he said, pronouncing each word like a coin. "And after him I will burn Lord Stark when he comes slinking to my gate like a wolf with a bone stolen from a better dog. I will burn Lord Arryn if you can pull him down from his pretty perch. I will burn Lord Tully for laugh." He caught himself the way a man sometimes catches a plate when he has not realized he meant to drop it. "I will burn those who broke faith." Rhaegar put his hands flat upon the table and spoke as a man speaks who has reached a place where he cannot walk further without falling. "If you burn Lord Robert, the city will burn with him." There was a tiny silence. Then the king leaned forward and his eyes showed their whites around the edges. "If the city is treasonous," he whispered, "let it burn." He had dreamed this moment. He had told himself he would leap forward then and take his father's wrists in his hands and lead him gently away. When he stepped, he found the motion was not gentle. He found that his fingers closed too tightly upon an arm too thin to bear them. He found that he had misjudged the distance to the precipice and was 2 paces farther along than he thought. He said very soft for his father's ear alone, "I am the heir. I am the realms. I will make this right." Eris looked at him with something almost like pity. "You will not," he said. He did not cry for the king's love then. There was no room for it. He raised his chin and spoke to the room. "By the laws of the realm I claim my right as Prince of Dragonstone to act as protector of the realm until such time as the king's health." He could not bring himself to say improves, permits him to resume those duties. I will convene the Great Council within a fortnight. I will." He did not finish, because someone at the far end of the room had moved, and his body knew it before his eyes did. Jaime Lannister had stepped forward one pace, and his sword had leapt half an inch out of the scabbard of its own volition, like a dog that cannot keep its haunches still. The movement died there. The boy's face was pale and beautiful with resolve and horror, married in it so exactly they could have been twins. Rhaegar saw how young he was. He saw the marks the chair's iron had left on Aerys's robe, tiny snags that were not blood, and might be later. "Sir Jaime," the king said in a voice that was almost a purr. "Do it." Jaime froze, as if blood were a liquid that could be congealed by command. Rhaegar moved, and the white bull moved with him. It was the older man's motion that halted Jaime's hand. It was not fast, but it had the weight of an old oath in it. Jaime's eyes jumped to Gerald's. He swallowed. The sword slid back into its scabbard as if the boy were laying down a child. "Your Grace," Gerald Hightower said, and in that voice was the sound of a door being closed firmly, but without anger. "The prince has spoken. We will do as the prince says, and as the law dictates, and in the morning we will see what the morning looks like." He set his palm upon the hilt of his own sword and lifted it half an inch. Not a threat. A reminder. His answer to what is a city. A place where men remember things aloud. When Rhaegar left the chamber, his legs shook, and he could not will them to stillness. Elia met him and took his hand and put it upon the back of her neck, where the skin was warm and alive, and it steadied him as surely as if he had leaned upon a pillar. They did not speak then, nor through the meal that followed, which was simple and tasted better than a feast would have. Afterward he went to his children and told Rhaenys a story about a clever girl who stole a fish from a king, because the fish had asked her to rescue it. The girl returned the fish to the river, and the river gave her a song. Rhaenys said the fish should have given her a cat. Rhaegar said that cats do not keep bargains, and Rhaenys said that was exactly why she wanted one. He laughed and felt a part of himself return. In the desert, the Tower of Joy stood against a sky that had taken the color of melted coin. The wind sang in its stones, because it always had, and because the man who leaned his shoulder there listened for it. Sir Arthur Dayne read the letter in the last light, and then he read it again, because he had known these stones long enough to know that the first reading always belongs to the place where you sit. The second reading is your own. He folded the parchment with hands that were not trembling. He went within, and found her seated with her feet bare upon the cool tile, and the veil cast back from her hair. She looked up when he came, and there was a line between her brows, in the place where worry sometimes became anger, and where joy sometimes became recklessness. She did not stand. "Does he come?" she asked. "He will come," Arthur said, and he could not tell if he comforted her or not. He had watched her learn this place's wind. He had watched it learn her in return. "He asks that we hold." She looked toward the window and the strip of sky within it. "We will hold," she said. "I have men who could ride with a word," Arthur offered, though he knew the answer. He knew it because he had known it when he took the first step into this tower, on the first day. "We will hold," she said again more gently, as if she had heard the refusal in his mouth, and had decided to grant it to him in a kinder tone. She put her hand upon the table beside the bowl for roses. There were no roses now. "Sometimes," she said, and her mouth had a quirk to it that made her look very young. "Sometimes I think this was madness. And then, I think it was the only thing. And then, I think I am tired. And then, I am ashamed of thinking I am tired." Arthur took a stool and sat because with her one must sit as one would with a sister, and the courtesy of it restored to him some old piece of himself. "You are human," he said, and she laughed once. The sound went up into the stones, and the stones held it there a while because they liked it. On the road, Eddard Stark dreamed of a tower in the desert where a woman sat with her feet bare, and he woke with dust in his mouth, and the taste of a great kindness he had not earned upon his tongue. He did not tell Howland his dream. Howland slept like a man who could sleep in a tree while wind roared and not be blown from it. Eddard rode with his few men, and did not think of how few they were. He thought instead of the first winter he had known in Winterfell, after he had learned how to count his own years, and of the way the deer had moved across the fields, in a line that had felt like a sentence they were writing with their bodies. He thought of the day he had taught Lyanna to turn a horse in a space that was narrower than the horse liked, and of how she had laughed and said that life was a narrow space, and she would have to learn to turn in it anyway. He thought, and the thinking made the day pass as if it were a long plank beneath his feet, not wholly trustworthy but holding for now. When night fell upon the city again, Rhaegar went one last time to the throne room. He did it because he knew he must see the thing he opposed at its largest and most beautiful shape, if he intended to ask men to pull it down. The torches had been dimmed, which made the iron look almost soft. The king was not there. Jaime Lannister was, and when Rhaegar came the boy bowed in that precise way men from the west learn at their mother's knees. Rhaegar paused and looked. He had not meant to ask, but the question had been swelling in him like a bruise. "If he asked you to do it," he said. Jaime's throat moved. He asked, And I did not," Jaime said. He stared at the iron as if he were counting its edges. "I am a Kingsguard. We are the realms," Rhaegar said without thinking. And then he remembered he had said the same to his father. Men wear the same words differently. He put his hand to the iron's edge and let it prick him. He thought of the prince that was promised, and the dragon with 3 heads, and the way prophecies are like nets you only realize are around you when your feet catch. He had thought he could make of them a ladder. He had been wrong. He would have to climb with his hands on the stone, and the stone would cut them. He drew his hand away and saw the blood and licked it without thinking. It tasted of iron. It tasted of the trident. It tasted of a letter folded carefully under a candle's stub, where there had once been a bowl for roses. "I will ask him again in the morning," he said. Jaime looked at him. "And if he says no, then I will ask the realm," Rhaegar said. He stood very straight so the boy would see what straightness looked like when a man had no wish to be straight and must be anyway. "In a fortnight, I will ask the realm." He left the hall, to the torches, and to the iron, and to the boy who had refused a command, and did not yet know how such refusals alter a man's inside. The night wind came in at the narrow windows and smelt faintly of the sea. The city slept, as it always slept, with one eye half open and a hand upon its belly. The realm turned upon the slow axle of its fear and its hope, and made the same creaking noise a ship makes when it decides to live through a storm. In a tower in the desert, the wind sang the dragon's name to a woman who had learned how to twist her hair so the nape of her neck would not burn even as the days turned hard. In a tent on the road, a man with broken ribs dreamed he was a boy on a pebbled shore and tossed stones into a lake that reflected a ruin. In the Vale, Jon Arryn lit a candle in a room where a boy once named Robert had fallen asleep with his head in Jon's lap and a streak of jam upon his mouth, and Jon said the boy's name out loud so that the stone would hear it and hold it. In the Reach, Lord Mace Tyrell slept and drooled and dreamed of marriages. In the Rock, Tywin Lannister stood and listened to the sea through stone and counted how many men would ask him for bread before winter. In the North, under a sky already thinking of snow, a girl with dirty knees raced a dog across a yard and shrieked when it licked her hand and was as happy as a creature can be. The morning would come, and with it, the pooling of men before the sept and the soft thunder of hooves on the hill, and the small exact noises that cities make when their kings do not sleep. Rhaegar closed his eyes in the last of the dark and found, to his astonishment, that this time sleep did not run from him. It came like a tame thing. He slept and did not dream of fire. He dreamed of a harp lying against a stone in a ruined summer place, and of a child's hand reaching from the shadow to pluck one string. The note went up thin and pure, and the air took it and let it travel unhindered, because sometimes even air understands a plea when it hears one.